Dear students, dear colleagues, dear debaters, and everybody else who happens to be with us but doesn't fit into any of the categories, a warm welcome. Okay, so people are still coming. Shall I wait a little bit? Right.
Yeah, it's still it was still 39. So that's fine. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. A warm welcome once again. Happy to see you all. Happy to see you in great numbers. It's an exciting moment, at least for me. You know, it's a wonder of technology, sort of. Thanks to Zoom, that not only can we hold this public debate under the current circumstances, but we could also, gather in great numbers. And never before has there been so many people. We are at what number now? Can't see, but it's more than 210 or something.
240.
240. Okay, right. So let's rejoice in this fact alone, and let's see what happens. It will be a first for us. Fingers crossed. Okay. People still being admitted?
I'll admit them as they come, it's fine.
Okay. All right. Anyway, it is my understanding that most of you, students and colleagues alike, have seen the Social Dilemma, this Netflix documentary that has sparked a quite lively discussion about what could be called unintended consequences of information technologies, most readily recognizable on social media platforms. Now, are these unintended consequences, are they turning us into increasingly predictable creatures, into more, easily manipulated humans? I mean, more easily manipulated people. We've always been easily manipulated and always been predictable, but is this, becoming worse and worse with these technologies? Or are these consequences nothing more but temporary glitches that I know we will no doubt learn how to address and how to minimize with appropriate regulations? That's one of the questions. Are we in danger? Are we being enslaved by these technologies? Or are we actually in charge? Are we in control? Is social media good news or bad news for democracy? These are some of the questions that tonight's debate is going to shed some light on, going to focus on. Now, we all know, we will all agree that this very debate would not be possible if it wasn't for the free access to the internet and social media. And yet it is going to revolve around the motion that goes as follows. This House believes that social media is ruining democracy, which is very much compatible with the main message of the Social Dilemma, you will agree. Now, the recording of this event will be available later tonight. I will send the link to it to all the teachers ASAP, probably in an hour after we part. You can expect it. Now, I would like to introduce the major players tonight, our debaters. On side government, I need to start with the government, of course. Elisabetta is with us.
Hi.
She's going to act as Prime Minister. Yeah. All older students probably know her, recognize her. You will remember her. She's been part of, she's been with us on many occasions, which is not something I can say about the next two speakers, her two colleagues from teammates. Benjamin is going to be assuming the role of member of government. He is a medical student. Well, Elisabetta is from the Faculty of Law. You will remember Benjamin is a medical student, and the closing speech for government will be delivered by Yernea. Here you can see her. She's another student of law. On side opposition with us tonight is Lucia. Again, another student that you are familiar with because she's been with us a couple of times, 3 times or something like that. She's currently a student at this faculty of arts. Sociology of culture is your cup of tea, correct? Member of opposition, Nika. She's actually your colleague. She's also a novice, not a novice debater, but she's here with us for the first time. Your colleague, a student of English, we are happy to say. And the closing speech will be the responsibility of Ivan. He is a sort of an OG within this context. I think you've been with us for more than 4 years. And yeah,
not talk about
and even, sorry?
Let's not talk about the years we've had now.
Right. You talked about it earlier. Anyway, here's a student. He comes from the Faculty of Social Sciences, and they are all eager to start fighting, they say. Okay, arguing and fighting. Hope they will behave anyway. All right, older students as well. You may have noticed Nusha. She's always been with us as Prime Minister, but tonight she decided she would rather adopt, she would act as Madam Speaker. So she'll be the one explaining the format, and she'll also explain her role in it, and she'll explain to you how you can pose questions and or give comments, or generally, share your ideas and your opinions about the topics that will be addressed. Anyway, so since it's obvious that Nusha is the one who calls the shots tonight, you may have noticed that she's effectively muted you all, and she may mute me any moment if she so pleases. So I'm going to hand it over to her. So a few more words from Nusha, and then I wish you all a very pleasant and also challenging enough evening. Thanks.
Okay, hello everyone from my end now. First of all, we would like to extend a very warm welcome to all our friends from the veterinary medicine group. This is the first time that we've opened up our debate to not just Faculty of Arts students, so welcome everyone. We're very happy to have you here. Okay, so from my end, I would like to just tell you about 3 things. First of all, how this debate will look like and how it will be a bit different, because you older students probably remember how debates look like in that big classroom. But now over Zoom, pretty much everything will stay the same. So debaters will continue to have their own 7-minute speeches. The only thing that will change is our discussion afterwards. You will be able to ask questions like you've always been, but it will work a bit differently. So you can, at any point during the debate, send the question you have in the chat, okay? And you can send it to me, and I will be the only one who sees it, okay? So that works great for all you shy people out there. If you want to ask it yourself, you are also able to do that. Just tell me and I will unmute you, okay? But during the debate, the only people who will be allowed to speak are our debaters and myself. Okay, so let's talk briefly about how this debate format works. So as Professor Jelicic already said, we have 2 teams. So team government and team opposition. Member of each team will be followed by a member of another team, and they will be exchanging their arguments. So their speeches will be formulated in a way wherein each of them will have a bit of negation and a bit of their own constructive materials, so their own constructive arguments. Sometimes the line between the 2 can be very blurry, okay? So sometimes don't be too surprised to hear their own arguments, even in the negation, because this is just how life is. Sometimes lines get blurry. During the speeches will be most likely around 7 minutes long. Some of our debaters love to speak, so they might go a bit over that, but we'll try to keep them in line. During the speech, the first minute is protected. They will be, this is so that they can make a good introduction. And the last minute is protected so they can make a good finish. The other 5 minutes are meant for people during the other team, so the other debaters, to ask questions. So don't be surprised if you suddenly see a different person jumping in, okay? So the other team is always allowed to ask questions, but it's on the debater who is speaking to decide if he or she wants to take that question, okay? So don't be too surprised if somebody decides not to take a question. Your questions, however, we will take all of them, but this is only after the debate. So this is pretty much all about how this debate business works. Now just a brief promotion since we have the platform. If any of you is at all interested in debate, we here have our own debate society, so University of Ljubljana Debate Society. I'll be brief. We still have weekly meetings, even in these times. So generally, all I can say is just find us on Facebook, message us, and we'll send you a Zoom link to our weekly sessions. They are on Wednesdays at around 7 in the evening. So a bit later, but they are plenty fun. Okay, so what I'll be doing from now on is I will be calling up all speakers, okay? So if there are no questions, and I see there are not, I would like to invite the Prime Minister, Elisabetta, to start this debate. Elisabetta, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nusha. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're debating whether social media is ruining democracy. Firstly, let's start off with some characterization. So under social media, we see a lot of different social platforms. We see Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Reddit, even sometimes YouTube can be used as a social media. We believe that the problem of social media today is that a lot of our social lives are being transformed into a technological version of a social life. This is especially maybe heightened during the pandemic, where we can see that we have to socially distance and all of our social lives are based on Zoom meetings and other stuff. But the problem when it comes to democracy with social media is that when people go on social media, they go there to socialize. So they have a certain level of comfort, which means that they're not necessarily having their guards up. They're not assessing the information they get critically. They just take everything for granted, have maybe nice chats, but they are not expressly vigilant what they read and what they believe. We believe that in order to have a good democracy, we need two things. Firstly, we need valid information being given out to the voters and to the people that are part of the information, so of the society. So this means no information such as fake news or misinformation that is edgy and very ambiguous. Secondly, what we believe is necessary is that we have people who are active, who participate in elections, who participate in forming governments, etc. We believe that this is necessary for a democracy to function, to have a lot of people going and voting and making decisions. What we have seen in the past few years is that social media is increasingly being used against the voters and against the voters' best interest. We saw this in the 2016 elections when Trump was elected in the US. We saw this with Brexit and with many other elections. We have groups of Russian hackers or many other people who are just want the world to burn, and they decide they're going to share misinformation and fake news over social media. No. We see that Trump's election and Brexit, they both had this debate were based on fake news. A lot of Brexit voters have decided, based on the Cambridge Analytica, that used their race, their gender, and their age against them, and formed advertisements for the pro-Brexit side to inform them with misinformation and give them this fake idea of what Brexit was actually going to be about. We see that a lot of people, therefore, voted against their own favor because they simply had the wrong information. Second, and especially, what the opposition might tell you, oh, there might be some legislation put in place to curb the spread of fake news, etc. We believe that none of this is really effective. One, because the fake news travels so fast on the social media that it's impossible to actually really limit it, because once it's out, and it's hard to verify, or a lot of people are not going to take the action to verify this information. And secondly, we believe that all of this fake news spreading legislation that is trying to stop it is often seen just as something that is imposing restrictions on freedom of speech. No, thank you. And a lot of politicians are using that against the liberal or the left or whoever is trying to impose these restrictions, and they're using it for their own political gain and make this another misinformation. So we don't believe that actually is effective. Before I move on, Ivan, you had a question.
Yeah. So when you say that, do you believe that the average Brexit supporter fact checks the Sun when they talk about, evil Europe, taking over British values and whatever?
Yes, thank you very much. So a lot of voters are not fact checking things, and I absolutely agree with that. That a lot of newspapers are also not having the highest standards. However, there is a difference, because when it comes to these newspapers, they can be held accountable, they can be taken to court, and there is actually effective legislation to try to change this, and there is more pressure put on them to be legitimate and have legitimate information. Whereas with fake news, you can have an account spreading this fake news one day, and it is gone the next day, but the information is already out and it's already traveling way too fast for people to curb it. Now, moving on to the last problem of social media, we believe the echo chambers are a massive problem. We are seeing how when you go onto certain pages, if you're going to go on Facebook and you're going to start to search for, I don't know, vacation in Malaga, you're suddenly going to have every second advertisement going about, oh, hotels in Malaga, flights to Spain, right? The same thing works with politics. Once you're going to Google anti-vax, or once you're going to Google, oh, LGBTQ are bad, you're going to start get that kind of content, because social medias are trying to create an echo chamber that you're going to find things that are related to your beliefs, which means you're not going to be given valid information. You will be given the information that will fit your criteria and your specific echo chamber, which means people are not well informed, which means that we have problems with democracy. But now moving to the second point that we see as a problem is the activation or the apathy of the voters in the democratic system. No, thank you. We see that the political activation is problematic. A lot of people are using social media to complain over politics, complain over different legislations. They have these useless rants and comment wars under certain posts. But the thing is that even though this might have led to more people talking about politics and trying to make their opinion heard, it doesn't translate into them voting or into them trying to have their opinion heard when it comes to the elections, or when it comes to participating actively in the election process or legislation process. A lot of people are being engaged only because they want their voice to be heard, but not because they actually want to make any change. Which means that a lot of people, no, thank you. A lot of people on the social media, even if the opposition says, oh, they're active, they're engaged, they're doing things, but the problem is that this never translates into something that would actually be good for democracy, because we don't have more voters, and we don't have more people actually trying to make changes, trying to make petitions that would actually matter, but we have more people ranting and complaining when it comes to on social media. And secondly, because of the nature of social media, because they create these echo chambers, what we get is polarization and further radicalization. Because the social media are meant to push you in the direction that you're going to. So if you've ever went on YouTube and Googled Flat Earth Society, the next thing you will have is UFOs and other suggestions like this. And the point is that you're going to be pushed into this loophole of thinking in this area and no idea how to get out. This brings people to the point where they are pushed into their own narratives, and they cannot make compromises with the other side. They cannot see other side as valid. Something that we're doing here in debate is, even though we're on opposite sides, we're trying to argue and talk to each other. What happens in social media, because of the polarization and radicalization, is that people don't really try to talk with each other anymore. They just try to censor each other out and try to unhear other voices, but stick with their opinions. And because of this, we have a worse democracy, because we have less interest for compromise. We have more interest for parties and people to overtake and have complete control and not cooperate with the opposition, because that would just be bad. Because people want their opinion to be heard, because we have more fake news, and because we have less compromise, the democracy is ruined by social media. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your speech, Elisabetta. And now for Leader of Opposition, Lucia.
You know, Elisabetta says that people on social media are comfortable, and that is a problem because they don't fact check what they hear. They don't really translate their rants into political, like expressing their political will by voting. And in general, they just kind of use it as their own personal, like, venting outlet. But what I would like for the proposition side to consider is just that the comparative of this debate is having political discussions in a bar. People are also comfortable there. They also probably won't fact check everything they hear, right? Usually it won't really make them go out and vote. It won't make them go out and protest. So at the end of the day, I don't see how any of their harms are really exclusive to their side, because everything that they talk about, has happened at some point in history, right? So, for example, you need to have like, we have fake news now that we have social media. Yes, there has always been fake news. This is not a new thing. This is not a new invention. These things happen, right? People lie. People have propaganda. Let's not be shocked by it. But also, it isn't like, social media is not a prerequisite for these things existing, right? And moreover, we think that a lot of the apathy points and shouting into the thin air is actually good and an expression of their political will and an like expression of democracy. What they need to tell us is why formal forms of participation, right? Why voting is the only important expression of democracy, why this is the only ingredient that we need in a healthy democracy. We think that voting is often, systemically discriminates against people, especially in countries like America. We think that we have a much freer discussion and a much more accessible discussion on social media, right? About Brexit, about like foreign interference, like, again, not exclusive, this has happened before, but also you get much bigger backlash on our side, right? When fake news is posted on social media, what you get is people commenting under it saying, this is fake and this is fake because of this. It is much easier to call them out. It is much easier to fact check them than, if they were being distributed in some other way.
Point.
And about echo chambers, like, again, not exclusive, this happens either way. I will not be friends with someone who is homophobic. I will not be friends with someone who is a racist, and this again is an echo chamber. And if I meet such a person, which is highly unlikely, I won't take their opinion seriously, as I wouldn't take them on social media, right? And we think that a lot of the forms of social media are actually trying to break these bubbles, such as Twitter, that just posts all the content it has as much as possible. So we think that what lacks really inside of propositions case is just having any form of exclusivity, and even though any form of exclusivity to their arguments at all. But let's talk about what we want to do on our side, right? We think that we don't have to defend all of the forms of social media. We don't think that we have to defend like worst of the worst cesspools of shit that happen on the internet, right? We think that a lot of social media is still in development. There are still improvements to be made, we agree. But we also think that democracy isn't just voting. Democracy is protest. Democracy is tweeting. Democracy is having discussions online, even if it's just shouting at each other. Informal political participation is just as or even more, since it's direct political participation. It is just as important as voting. We think that the massive outreach that we need in order to have people be educated about politics is exclusive to social media. So let's talk about participation, right? Because we think that participation is the biggest problem of the state of democracy right now, right? People don't know what's going on. People don't know who's representing them. People don't care when elections start. People don't care what issues we are talking about, right? And why does this happen? We think that politics are inherently inaccessible, right? They are a world of intellectuals. They are a world of political jargon. People have a hard time understanding it. People have a hard time filtering through all the information. And this is one of the reasons as to why Trump rose, right? He was an outsider, a simple man that people could relate to. We think that with social media, it is easier for people to educate themselves because it removes the barrier of entry, right? You don't need to live in the capital to go to a rally. You don't need to live in Ljubljana to go to a protest, because you can engage in other forms of protesting through the social media. This allows you to be more interested in politics because you can see that you are actually able to participate no matter where you live, right? We also think that this is a place where you can discuss your ideas safely without the fear of being ridiculed, without the fear of not understanding the answers. We think that this gives you access to a wider array of people than just your village of 500 people and you don't even know half of them, right? We think that comment sections are often places where people talk to each other and different like echo chambers burst, right? We think that you can also gain access to your representative through the internet easier than sending mail, right? We think that this makes politics not inaccessible. It's not scary. It's not only for politicians and not only for professors. But moreover, what we think is also important is that now it's easier to be elected, right? You have the ability to elect a common person. You don't need to be a millionaire and have loads of money for TV ads, for billboards, and to travel to rallies and such, right? A popular tweet can have a bigger outage, and it is easier to interact with your constituents. An example of that would be, AOC streaming the Among Us game and interacting with her voters in that way, right? It's like free to do so, right? We think that it will reach many people. It's a free way to promote yourself, and you don't have to be a millionaire to pay for it. We think that with that, we get a more realistic representation for people, because now, like, a middle-class person is not represented by a millionaire, but rather they have the opportunity to vote for someone who is also middle class and understand their issues. So the impacts are that politics can become a common person's interest, and it's easily accessible to debate and to gain information. But we also think that representation is increased, and that in itself is good for the health of democracy.
Thank you very much, Lucia, for your speech, and thank you for your questions. Keep them coming in. We'll address them at the end. And now for member of government, Benjamin.
Right. The primary question of this debate is the legitimacy of publicly accessible information and the societal impact of those information. Now, we say on our side of the house that the information accessible on social media is more often fake, it's inaccurate, and it leads to undesirable consequences, right? So in this speech, I will present 3 points of rebuttal to the former speaker and 3 points of consecutive material. So first to the rebuttal. Now, Lucia said that populism exists in both worlds, right? In ours, where social media is bad, and in theirs, where social media exists in this widespread way, right? But we say that's not necessarily the case, right? Yes, fake news will to some degree exist in any society, any organized society, but we say that it spreads significantly faster if there is social media involved, right? The reason for that is that people don't know that the news they're receiving is targeted specifically to them, right? They don't know they're in an echo chamber where every news they receive is based on the news they've already searched for, right? So we say that's a very important element to the spread of fake news. Secondly, on the echo chambers, right? Why echo chambers are far worse under the world where social media is the primary source of information? Not yet even. The reason for this is the same, right? Echo chambers exist in like real life interactions, right? But on social media, we do not, the users are not aware of the fact that they're being targeted into certain groups, into certain circles and groups on Facebook, which actually promote this extremization of political views. Not yet even. And the last point of rebuttal is polarization and lower participation, right? Lucia said that participation in the political process is actually getting larger and larger, right? Factologically, that's not true, right? The political participation in the majority of countries is not rising, and in many cases it is falling. And what we see is that this political participation is getting more polarized, right? The people on the extreme sides of the political spectrum are going to vote in large percentage, right? But the people in the middle are not. What that means is that the people like these dictators and extremists and like people like Trump, Kaczynski, Bolsonaro are far more likely to get elected if the information on politics is spread on mainly on social media.
Okay,
right. Now to the consecutive, no, not yet even. Now to the arguments, right? First, I will organize the arguments in like 3 main points, right? The first point is on free press, right? What is free press and why it is far less likely to exist if the majority of information that is publicly available comes from social media, right? We say that the free press essentially means that a media source, whatever it may be, is able to print whatever it wants, right? Whatever its interests are. Now, the problem with this is like also the element of free press is that these media sources are not forced to print or like post something based on the interests of certain interest groups, the interest of capital or the interests of the state. Now, the problem with social media is that it functions on a mechanism where like the political ads, the info, the news are being targeted to specific groups of people based on the interests of the people paying for those ads, right? So there is no the concept of free press in social media. Yes, Ivan, go ahead.
So Benjamin, there isn't a single newspaper in the world that's not financed exclusively or in a large part through ads. And let's not remember, who was the one that pushed Hillary over Bernie? Was it social media or was it CNN?
Thank you, Ivan. Now, when we compare conventional media with social media, we have to know one thing, which I repeat constantly throughout my speech. The ads you see in newspapers, such as Dnevnik, such as New York Times, you're aware of the fact that those are ads. Now, on social media, you're not aware of the fact that the info you're getting is actually paid info from interest groups, right? Secondly, the mainstream media, like this conventional media, actually gets a very large part of its revenues by selling its news, right? Selling what it creates, right? While social media gets its money by selling the customer, the people using Facebook, to their consumer, which are basically companies which buy ads on Facebook, right? The very good example of this is the GOP and the targeted advertisement, right? The advertisement of the GOP on the internet has led to the election of like senators and congressmen of the GOP, which would never be elected if it weren't for those ads in 2016, right? Now, to the second point, the organized mass media and why it's important to have organized mass media. Like, I don't have to emphasize that social media is not like organized media houses like New York Times, right? The differences are obvious. Now, why is it important to have organized mass media within a democracy to call it a functional democracy? We say that the mere existence of these media powerhouses, such as, I don't know, The Guardian, BBC, New York Times, RTV, and so on, is important because it creates accountability, right? We say that it creates accountability because of 2 reasons. Firstly, because those news companies are accountable to their consumers. They're accountable to the people who read their news, who buy their newspapers, who buy their services, right? Facebook is not accountable to the people who use Facebook, right? Secondly, those media companies are accountable before the law, right? Because there exists like laws which control the media, which control what can, like, which control if the information is fake and the fake news spreads. Like, there are laws to stop it, there are laws to limit that, and so on. That doesn't exist for social media, and even in the countries where it exists, it's like
Benjamin.
never, no, thank you, Ivan. It's like never utilized. It's never used in actual courts of law. And the last point is on the freedom of access of information. Like, again, and this is the emphasis, which is the most important part of my speech, and that is why I repeat it again and again and again. The information on Facebook, the information on Twitter, the information on Instagram is targeted information, right? People who like access this information do not know that what they're accessing is actually things that has been specifically designed for a group into which they fit, right? If you type anything into Google, the results you get are based on what you've searched before. That doesn't happen with conventional media, right? That doesn't happen with, I don't know, New York Times. When you go to the store and buy a newspaper, or if you go to the Guardian site and buy an edition of Guardian, you don't have news based on what you read. You have the news which anyone who buys this gets, right? And for all those reasons, social media undermines democracy. For all those reasons, social media creates populists and promotes them. And for all those reasons, we are very proud to stand on side government. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. And now member of the opposition, Nika.
Thank you. Okay, so the first thing we need to clear up in today's debate are the incentives of different media sources, right? What we think on the side of op is that there is no one objective media source because there is no objective truth, right? Truth is relative. And we think that that is why we need to look at the incentives that certain media houses have, right? Or media sources have. First of all, we think that this incentive might be for profit, as they claim, right? They said that ads basically make us, the viewers and the readers, the profit that is being, like the product that is being sold to the advertisers. We tell you, yes, that's the case with traditional media as well. They put ads in newspapers. You see commercials on television. You've always been a product. Now you just start to notice it, right? And so we think that profit is always an incentive. But we also think that if profit is like the inherent necessary incentive of social media, we think that's not a bad thing because the alternative is another incentive, and that is ideological incentive, right? We think that traditional media can also have incentives that simply like come from the owners of the media, or for example the creators of the media. A newspaper can be ideologically like established depending on who makes it, who owns it, maybe even the government if the government controls it, right? And we'll get to that in my speech. So what we see here is that having a profit-driven incentive is sometimes better because what we get is now this diversity of ideological backgrounds and this diversity of information. So we have access to all of it, and that actually creates democracy, right? So deciding on your opinion while being given all of the possible information here. Okay, now going on to echo chambers, the second point. No, thank you. So they told you that, right, that echo chambers are an inherent problem of the social media. We're telling you echo chambers happen in real life too. They explain very well how we tend to like hang out with people who think the same as we do, or like want to see things that we agree with, right? We say that first of all, if you go out into the store and buy Democrazia, you're gonna get what you want to read, right? When you buy Democrazia. We think that algorithms actually have a couple of benefits here. First one being, no, thank you, that there is engagement in the comments, as Lucia already mentioned, right? That you are bound to come around with like somebody who doesn't agree with you, and you will have to deal with that. Secondly, we think that algorithms make mistakes. You know yourself better than an algorithm does, which means that when you go out and buy Democrazia, you know what you're buying, right? When an algorithm suggests something, it may be wrong, and that's a good thing because now you're faced with something that you don't necessarily want right away, right? And you might change your opinion. And thirdly, we think that algorithms don't necessarily always want to please you. We think that algorithms also want their users to engage, right, with the post. So they intentionally sometimes put posts that you would disagree with, and we think that's positive as well, because all of those characteristics cause you to be more in contact with different opinions that you would have been otherwise. And now, mind the comparative, right? Because they're saying, no, thank you, let me just finish this. What they're saying is the comparative is you not being in an echo chamber. We're saying, no, the comparative is you not speaking with anybody who doesn't agree with you, you only talking with your family members who probably also think like you, or you just don't mind their opinions, right? And we think that social media is actually a great way for you to expand your horizons and your opinions. Now, yeah, POI, go ahead.
Look, you have to recognize that at the point at which you're in an echo chamber in social media, you're not aware that you're in an echo chamber, right? Because this is your model of reality, and you think that everybody just thinks that way, and this is how the world actually looks like. You have to engage with that.
Well, I engage with that, with the fact that people in real life also don't believe that they're in echo chambers just because they only know people that they agree with, right? We also wouldn't consider ourselves to be in an echo chamber. I would consider myself a well-rounded person with a nice palette of friends, but I think that's not true, right? I have very specific friend groups. Okay, and now on to political participation, which was basically the second thing here, right? They said that social media automatically causes less voters. Now, first of all, what we claim here is that's not necessarily true. Why would social media be the cause of that? It might just be that like the conditions right now are more stable than they were in the past, for example, or people maybe think that the conditions are more stable and they don't go voting, right? They need to bring us this mechanism why this is the cause, right? And secondly, we think, again, what is the comparative? Do you think that people would be voting more if there was no social media? And why so, right? We think that, first of all, there are other forms of political participation that are just as great. For example, when you have like a thing that concerns a minority, right? A fragmented minority, now they have a way of going out there and getting their rights and like proclaiming what they believe in. And that is, for example, the example of environmental protests, right? They happened with a fragmented minority that went out there and got the representation, mind you, to be able to go out and vote later on, because before that, they didn't have a representation. For example, in America, you want to vote left and you want to, well, I don't know, read leftist traditional media, tough luck, buddy. You're not going to get it. It's just the social media brings this diversity that we necessarily need. Now, going on to my argument, and that is decentralization of power. So how is this important, right? First of all, we believe that social media provides a unique safety net for when democracies start turning into other things that aren't democracies, like autocratic regimes, right? 3 points of analysis here. First of all, why is centralized control over information so detrimental? Second, structural reasons why traditional media is very vulnerable to this control. And thirdly, a comparative how social media isn't, right? First of all, so why is centralized control over information so detrimental? We believe that power over information is basically power over people. You influence their judgments about the world, right? So you influence their actions. In example, if you live in North Korea and you're told that your country is the greatest and that is the only news you get, mind you, you're not bound to believe anything else, right? Secondly, there are structural reasons why traditional media is much more vulnerable to that control, to that centralization of power, right? First of all, we have social media that is funded by the government, right? They can take the funds away. For example, how the current prime minister's government in Slovenia is lowering the funds for RTV, right? And then we have the traditional media that isn't funded by the government. Well, they're still bound by laws. And that's a problem because laws can change. There can be censor. There has been censor in the past, right? And now let's look at the social media, right? We see that we have this participatory or citizen journalism here that is not dependent on funding or bound by the laws, right? We see that the government cannot seize the control of social media corporations because they're too big. Can you imagine Hungary taking on Facebook? No, you cannot, right? Secondly, it's unlikely that social media corporations will cooperate with the governments that are oppressive, right? Because they want to like cater to this democratic audience because the majority of their audience is democratic. We see Facebook being like the owner of Facebook being on trial because they lost the trust of the people, and we see action being taken. That is how we know that we can cause change, right? Because we see that Twitter, Facebook, they've all been implementing these ways of like taking down fake news and taking down the power of the governments that try to influence it, right? And we see the impact here, right? First of all, people finally know what's going on. So they can fight for their democracy versus not even knowing that things are going wrong when they are going wrong, right? And secondly, we have this international pressure that can build up, right? So now there is this possibility, especially for countries that are in unions such as the EU, that the society might try to pressure the governments to do the right thing. And that is why we believe that social media is absolutely crucial for democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your speech, Nika. And now for the final speech of Government Whip,
The crucial difference between a debate in a bar and debate on social media is the fact that in a bar, you and your 5 drunk friends debate something, nobody else hears you, you do not take it seriously. Meanwhile, on social media, this is widely accessible to a wide audience of people, and everybody thinks it's serious just because it happened on the internet. This is a very important difference. 3 things in my speech. First of all, on what is unique about social media. Second of all, on why social media is ruining democracy on 4 different points. And third of all, I'll talk about this idea of decentralization of power that Nika brought up, right? So first of all, what is unique about social media? 4 mechanisms. Firstly, we tell you that the difference between like an online forum or traditional media and social media is just how integrated its use in our society, in our daily life it is, right, in our society. This means that everyone goes on Facebook basically every day. Everybody goes on Instagram basically every day. Meanwhile, not everybody reads Democracia every day. There's a key distinction, right? Second of all, we tell you how accessible it is. You have to, in order to buy a newspaper, you have to go out, buy it, and pay money for it. Meanwhile, for Facebook, you just log onto your computer, which the majority of like middle class or middle class people already have. And this is why, consequently, thirdly, there is a more massive outreach that you can use on social media, right? Because if you say racist things at the safety of your house, nobody hears you. But if you say them online, they spread fast, and people that are directly affected by them can also hear you, right? And fourthly, key difference is in algorithms, right? We tell you that social media uses algorithms in order to like cater to you, right? To show you the things that you already like. This is problematic because, as we explained to you, people go in echo chamber, people get polarized and they get radicalized. More on that later in my speech, right? So we have given you many mechanisms on how this is unique about social media. They cannot get away with telling you that we have not proven this. Now, why social media ruining democracy? First of all, on political participation. Political participation is an important part of democracy because democracy can only be functional as so far as the majority of the people that live in a society actually participate in it and actually vote and do all those things, right? Now, how exactly does political participation look like with social media? 2 things. First of all, we say that the majority of the people who get politically active just because of social media are not actually likely to be that politically active. Those are the people who are likely to share a story on their Instagram about how something is happening, but not actually do anything about it. They might sign an online petition that might or might not do anything, but those are not the people who would actually like go out in the streets and vote, right? And now, second of all, how they tell you that like, oh, but protesting is more important, like voting doesn't really matter that much. 2 points here. Firstly, we said the majority of the people who get politically active uniquely due to social media are not the people who go out on protest. These people will be satisfied by clicking a button on their computer and saying, here, my activism is done. I'm a great citizen, gold star. Let's finish this, right? And second of all, we tell you that voting, even if you don't accept this premise, voting is more important than going to protests. Why is that so? Because voting is the one that actually can tangibly change anything. Protests can change stuff once in a while, maybe once in a century, but otherwise, voting is more relevant. For example, even if we dethrone Janša right now, and people who go to Friday's protest do not go out and vote against Janša, he will still win and be in the government again, which means he will have influence over the people again, right? We tell you that voting is likely to have a bigger impact. That's why we need people to actually go out and vote and not simply protest, right? Cool. So now to the second point on the political discourse, right? Why is political discourse important for democracy? It is crucial because democracy is based on our like exchange of our opinions and talking to each other and our argumentatively explaining things to each other, right? Now, why is discourse worse on the side of the house where social media is super prevalent, right? We say that discourse on social media tends to be worse. Why is this so? First of all, because of anonymity, and secondly, because anyone is anonymous and they're more brave to say anything, and second of all, simply because like it is a more comfortable place where we go out and relax, right? What can this lead to? This can lead to lines between what is actual real political discourse that is constructive and what is not get extremely blurred, right? At the point at which like there is a news article by traditional media shared on social media, for example, a BBC article, and there's a whole bunch of like trolls on there who are commenting mean things, ugly things, and unconstructive things. This is what normalized political discourse becomes, right? Which is why when you log onto Facebook, you don't see people like talking to each other in a nice manner. You only see people arguing at each other. You see people trolling. You see people in general being not exactly respectful. And this is not actually helping anyone create a democratic society and like actual discourse and exchange of ideas. This is simply just a discourse that has gone wrong and it's completely reduced to being outright barbaric, which is why this is very problematic, right? But thirdly, on the awareness of people, right? So awareness of people is extremely important. People need to have as much information as possible in order for them to be good citizens to go out and vote. Before I move on to how exactly does this change under social media, Ivan?
So considering the results of the last election, and especially what happened on social media, would you not say that general awareness about the problems of news on social media has drastically increased in a very short span?
Even if it has increased, it is still very problematic, and I'll provide you the mechanisms as to why, right? Even if, I'm not saying it did. So now onto the fake news, because I think that your question is very much related to it, right? So fake news spreads extremely fast on social media. How? 6 mechanisms. First of all, because on the internet, people have a higher tendency to believe that something is true. This is especially true for older people, but also like the majority of other citizens as well, right? Second of all, because anyone can share anything and it's on there and it looks credible. Third of all, because it spreads faster, right? Fake news tends to be sensationalistic, which is why people spread it, which is why in general it spreads faster. Fourthly, there is no checks and balances, right? Traditional media tend to have a sort of checks and balances onto what is okay and what is not to publish in different degrees, but sure, and here they do not exist, right? Fifthly, people actually like, fifthly, we say that there's a difference between accountability, right? Because so traditional media can be held accountable. Your racist grandma cannot be held accountable. And sixthly, there's the distinction on when people read traditional media and when people go on social media, right? People go on social media to relax, they're likely to be less critical, right? And it's extremely problematic that fake news can spread this fast because people then believe things that are not true. And they're like, they cannot be active citizens if they believe a whole bunch of things that are true and probably even politically motivated. Cool. Now, fourthly, I want to talk about polarization and echo chambers, right? Note that Nika said that there's it's the same if you're in an echo chamber in real life, in your echo chamber on social media. Look, if you're in an echo chamber in real life, you know 6 people who think like you. If you're in an echo chamber online, you're surrounded by thousands of people who think exactly the same as you. This is how you start to believe that this is the model of society, right? For example, if you're Nazi and somebody in your real life tells you you're wrong, but there's thousands of people supporting you, you're not going to believe those thousands of those 5 people. You're going to believe those thousands of people that are behind you on social media. This is how social media is unique. Too late, Ivan. This is how social media is unique, and there's a difference between like echo chambers online and on social media, right? But now, lastly, to talk about like decentralization of power, right? I tell you 2 things here. Firstly, we tell you that like this is exactly the problem, right? The fact that your racist grandma considered as legitimate as real news, it's very, very problematic, right? But second of all, we tell you that like there's a reason why we have like laws in the first place, right? It's to prevent things like hate speech. And with having decentralized power, things like hate speech can spread with increased speed, and which is very problematic and very bad for democracies, and also like very bad for the minorities who this hurts. So why should definitely vote government? What have we told you? We told you that political participation gets worse, discourse gets worse, awareness of people gets worse, people get in echo chambers, people get polarized. Please vote government.
Thank you very much, Ignea. And now, last but not least, opposition whip, Ivan.
All right. Hi, everyone. Just let me start the timer. Okay. So a very fashionable thing in debate is to talk about burdens of teams. So what are the burdens that one or the other team needs to prove? So, and because it's always nice to be fashionable, I will do just that. I think side government in this debate has 2 major burdens they need to prove. The first thing they need to prove is that all the negative effects they talk about are inherent to social media. So in other words, that it is social media and not some other things that are causing this negative effect. And the second burden they need to prove is that this is a bigger issue than all of the benefits we talk about, right? So that this is an issue in the first place, and that is on imbalance a bigger issue than what we bring. Now, before we look specifically at these 2 burdens and why government in this debate today fails to actually prove them and to carry them, let's look at some extraneous points that kind of, I think, help us understand them later on. The first problem with side government in this debate is that, if you've noticed, the examples we hear are very, very cherry-picked. They're basically 2. One is Trump and the other is Brexit. And I want to talk about specifically why this is problematic later on. But notice that all the other examples where social media played a big role, a substantial role in political activities, were decidedly pro-democracy, right? Things like the Arab Spring, things like Hong Kong, right? The protests there. Like, notice, Madam Speaker, every time there's a pro-democracy protest in a tyrannical dictatorship, they ban Facebook. I wonder, right? Is it because they're like, oh, we love democracy so much, let's ban this thing that is bad for democracy? I think not, right? So let's not, be too focused on like this internet, Reddit, American politics like point of view, and look at all the other examples which are decidedly pro-opposition. The second thing, and this Nika already spent some time on this, so I don't want to spend too much, but we don't have to defend like the worst version of social media. By the way, the worst version is Facebook, right? Things like Twitter and other networks have done a much better, I don't want to use the word great, but much better job at controlling all of the issues side government talks about, right? Like things like banning political ads. Notice how much of side government's case just is irrelevant if we ban political advertising, right? And I think that's crucial to understand why their case does not fulfill the burden of it being inherent to social media. And lastly, before I go to the burdens, this idea, notice how the main negative effect that side government brings to democracy is Donald Trump being elected and Brexit happening. I think that's a little rich because just falling into this pit of saying everything Donald Trump, and the reason people vote for Donald Trump is because they're evil and not because the interests have been systematically ignored by the political establishment for the last 50 years, I think that's problematic. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Donald Trump is great, but saying that him being elected is bad for democracy and not, a wake-up call to Western democracies that we've been ruining our societies for 30 years, I think that's problematic. And we get no explanation of side government exactly how Donald Trump being elected or Brexit happening is detrimental to democracy, which is what this motion is about. And I think that's a big problem. And lastly, we get this idea about how, the comparative that we get. And this is another, I think, I will use the word elitist point of view, elitist view that side government takes in this debate, because they compare normal people having political discussions on Facebook to specific, political like news sources that like 10 people read because they're like students of political science, right? I'm over exaggerating just to illustrate the point. The comparative of people having shitty discussions on Facebook is people having shitty discussions on like at home, right, etc. Not super like educated guesses about the future of like the European Union that happen under political articles, right? And so being informed by all of this, let's look at the two burdens side government have and why they don't carry them and why they don't take this debate. Right? So first, let's ask ourselves, what is so inherent? What are the inherent things? So what are the effects that are inherent to social media that side government talks about, right? Fake news itself, not inherent at all. The Soviet Union spent 6 years being excellent at fake news, right? Propaganda, like fake news is just a buzzword. Those exact kind of newspapers I talked about a minute ago used to sound smart. It's propaganda, right? It's propaganda on the internet, but the basic concept is the same. It's nothing new. The only new thing we get from side government that maybe can be considered inherent is the speed of its spread. And I will deal with this later on. I promise I won't forget. So that's it. The second thing we get about that's inherent about social media is this concept of echo chambers, right? Ooh, another buzzword we use a lot, right? And again, we've shown you this is nothing new. Right? Why? Because the comparative they're making is wrong. The comparative is not, people reading around, oh, I buy 7 newspapers so that all of my news sources are super varied, right? That's not the comparative. Those people are also equally well informed on social media. The comparative are people who never read like good. The comparative is people who buy Slovenian Novice once a month, right? That is the comparative we need to be making. And again, we don't actually get a lot of new material on this point as side government, right? The only idea is this problem of selling advertisement. Again, nothing new. Why is this nothing new so important? Because they need to prove that it is now that we have social media, these new effects are happening, which are detrimental to democracy. And if they don't prove that these effects are new, right, and that they don't exist in a world without social media, they don't prove their case. And so let's tackle this question of selling advertisement and echo chambers and similar things. Right? So the first problem is that, as I said already, this is not new or especially new. And the second problem is that side government is only relying on a very small example and, politically speaking, a very small time frame of negative effects. Why? Because social media is new to society. Okay, you can hear it in their own speeches. Who is the problem? It's not young people as much. It's older people who need to get used to this new system. And any big social system will have such, early difficulties. We don't Our position is not that social media has no issues, right? Let's not, like, it has many issues, but we think these issues are one solvable and they're worth it. They're worth the benefits. And notice how many of side government's negative effects are alleviated simply by educating people a little about social media. If people have a basic understanding how social media works, side government basically has no case. And we think, one, this is already happening, and this year's election in America wasn't perfect, but it's already a very good example of how this happened. And we think we can do more. And if we can prove that with a little action, with a little improvement, so like the vast majority of government's case goes away, they don't have a case that social media is inherently a problem for democracy. All in all, Madam Speaker, you need to ask yourself, not are there issues? There are always issues. There are always problems. You need to ask yourself, is it worth it? What will the world look like with social media, and how does it look without? With social media, it looks like media being like CNN or like authoritarian. So, for example, USSR, right? That's the kind of oppressive world we can live in. Social media gives us protests, gives us the Arab Spring, gives us the Bernie effect, gives us all the suppressed things. And just because the suppressed things are coming to the light, that doesn't mean that a bad thing is happening, even if we don't like it. So all in all, for the sake of democracy, we beg you to oppose.
Thank you very much, Ivan, and thank you all debaters for this excellent debate. Now it's time for some of you guys' questions. So if you have any, write them in the chat or write and I will unmute you. But first, we have a question for, I think, primarily for side opposition, but any of the debaters are welcome to chime in. And this is a question you've addressed somewhat, but I think we can go into more detail. And this is, who would be responsible for when racist or homophobic groups are given a platform and act on their beliefs, which can so easily spread on social media? So who is the responsible party then?
Can I answer? I know I just spoke, but so as side government kind of already said, there already are mechanisms to deal with this. When I say, I mean in the sense that we know, like, we have mechanisms that control more traditional media in this sense. I don't think it's unthinkable. I think we can as a society, we can agree that there exist some unquestionably objectively bad things which can be banned on a legal level. But more important, there are not actually a lot of laws that prevent people from printing that, I don't know, something racist. I don't want to say it. The way we as a society control media is mostly through like user pressure, right? It's the reputation of a newspaper that keeps it true, right? It's the reputation that, like, prevents it from printing whatever. And I think personally the same thing can easily happen on social media, and it is happening, right? When people are boycotting Facebook and leaving it, it might not seem like Facebook is doing a lot, but I guarantee you there's a lot of meetings happening Facebook headquarters. But and Twitter is a good example of how this happens. Is it perfect? No. Could they do more? Should they do more? Yes. But I think that those are the mechanisms.
Okay. Thank you, Ivan. Anyone else from government, opposition? Any other thoughts? So should it be primarily on the social media houses to regulate, or do we think that maybe the state also has a role to play here?
I think that at the end, of course, it's the role of the state, right? Because they have the role of regulating the people who might actually like do actions that are against minorities, that are racist or sexist or whatever, right? This is the role of the state. This is the acting part. And as far as the platform goes, I think the side of op agrees here that social media is responsible in a way that the users basically condemn it for it. And as I explained on the example of like trials for Facebook, right, we see that it works, that putting pressure on social media corporations is changing things.
Okay, so students, teachers, do we have any questions from your end, maybe? So then a question from me, maybe, debaters. Is there anything you wanted to address but kind of ran out of time? So another point anyone maybe wanted to raise but couldn't?
I mean, I could just point out maybe that like, okay, for speeches are supposed to pack up with information, so there's always more things that I wanted to say. But I mean, it's fine because Yadnaya later repeated it. But I just wanted to point out that the difference maybe between like social media and newspapers is that there's a different kind of input you need to of energy that you need to have if you want to go and buy a newspaper or go and read a newspaper article, because it has to be like your choice, you're going to do it. Because when it comes to like echo chambers and social media, it's offered to you or even imposed onto you. And I thought that was like maybe an important point when it comes to like assessing how information is being spread. And that's why when I was discussing, oh, fake news spread so much faster online, like one of the reasons is also because you're kind of forced to read those informations or at least glance at them, even if you don't want to read them. Whereas if you want to learn something on your own, you will go buy the newspaper or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, another question for everyone. What do we think about this random websites that are not really social media, containing more and more social media-like elements? So the whole, the changing of internet into being more of a cooperative platform. Do we think this has good or bad influences?
Like, I mean, like it's probably both, right? I think that on a lot of, I think that, you know, Twitter doing stories is generally redundant because people, like, they're not going to be used, right? You have better platforms for that. But I think that they're trying to stay, you know, hip and kind of appeal to younger users. But I think that I don't think this will change the content that is on Twitter very much.
Mm-hmm.
I think also something that we perhaps didn't spend enough time talking about was, I think, maybe the difference in perception that I think even for us, like even so, like, oh God, I hate to say this word, younger generations than me, the perception that like how social media works and what it is so radically different. I think in the sense that it's not like it's part of the, like it's not a separate thing from like your life, the general, like your identity. And I think there's good and bad things in that. I think there's good and bad things in, especially in the sense that while that sounds kind of like maybe scary at first, it also means that they, like younger generations, have a lot more tools within their, I don't know, how general, socialization to deal with problems of social media, right? That are aware of like very basic things like not clicking big red flashy buttons on the internet, similar things that diminish a lot of the negative effects, but can enhance some others, right? Especially those that Yanea talked about people not realizing that they're being, manipulated. So I think when it comes to how we should regulate social media, I think that's probably where the focus should go, not on limiting it, but specifically on making sure that it's clear what's going on. Because once you have that, I think people will be able to self-regulate in a way, like when I talk about like users.
Great. Now to steer kind of a slightly off topic of democracy, but still remaining very relevant to the movie Social Dilemma. First of all, what's your general opinion of the movie? We all saw it. Does anyone have any strong feelings they would like to share? Guys?
I mean, like, I'm honestly not a fan. I think that it's based on fear mongering, and I don't like that in my documentaries. I think that a lot of the points that they make are redundant, such as, ooh, social media will now shape your identity. Yes, but it would have been shaped like in either way, right? Either school would shape it, or your favorite bar would shape it, or your friends would shape it. I think that a lot of the points are just or either poorly done or exaggerated to an extent that I just cannot buy them. I do think, however, they do have a good point about radicalization. However, it's a shame that they spend literally 10 minutes on it and they don't really do any analysis behind it. They just show a guy who was dumped becoming a Nazi, which I think that's like a little bit of a stretch for the movie to do.
Yeah, it's not just a stretch. I think the problem is that the people who watch that movie get that classic, oh, but it couldn't happen to me, right? Oh, but yeah, I mean, yeah, like let's go for the classic cliche, which are Nazis, right? And like, right? And it's the same. Like, the problem is that this radicalization doesn't happen like that, right? It happens that somebody, somebody gets dumped, then he gets, like, it's not just more gradual, but it happens to like everyone. And as Lucia said, first of all, it happens outside of social media just as well, right? I mean, let's not forget the Nazis happened before social media. So it's clearly possible. But I think the problem is that a lot of people who watch that don't realize that the same thing is happening to them. Just it might be, anti-vax, or it might be, in a completely different like direction. Because I think they could have picked a much more nuanced example that isn't just Nazis.
I agree. Sorry. I think the things they are saying, right, generally okay. I feel like the things they are showing in the movie are somewhat of a stretch. Largely with this like artificial intelligence, I just felt that the concept of representing specialized artificial intelligence as robots and human-like creatures that try to control you and have their own like mean incentives was problematic, because as said, like people were pointing out that the change is gradual and that algorithms are basically maths, right? They're just maths and with like this desired result, but this desired result doesn't have any intentions behind it. So I felt like the picture didn't quite match the feeling of the people that were speaking.
Okay, excellent. Another question. So we can now observe this surging cases of mental illnesses amongst especially young people that can be linked to social media use. Now, none of us are experts, but let us assume or guess. Can we regard social media to be the root of the cause, or is there some other elements that are influencing it, and like inherent predisposition or something like that. And social media is an imperfect coping mechanism that impedes self-improvement in this field. So what do we think about social media and mental health in general?
I
Oh,
could
go
maybe
ahead, go
just
ahead.
like point out, sorry, that there's like, I think that one of the mental issues that are very connected with social media are things like body dysmorphia. I think this is like maybe even more prevalent in the female part of the society. I wouldn't say that the social media is the root cause of all evil, because I think that body dysmorphia exists since like forever, because there's always like a beauty standard that women are supposed to look a certain type, otherwise they're not considered beautiful. I think what social media is currently doing is that it is, let's say, type of radicalization going into both sides. So on one hand, you have a lot of people that are trying to normalize different body types, different looks, and all of that. But on the other hand, I guess most of the people, especially, I really hate social media influencers. Like that triggers me, because they make money off of causing body dysmorphia and then selling products to these people, going like, oh, if you buy this shampoo, your hair is gonna look like my photoshopped version of hair, right? So I think that on one hand we do have this try to normalize bodies, but I still think that like the money lies in creating more body dysmorphia within people, and I think it's a hard thing to beat with the current social media. But I like the fact that there is more and more like following the latest Khloe Kardashian face uncovered on Instagram. Like the UK Parliament was talking about imposing like restrictions, or that people will have to point out whether the photo was like photoshopped or edited or not. So I think that like that could go by a certain extent towards improving this, but I guess it's still not going to be perfect.
And can I just add something at the end about like general like mental issues? I think it's great that we talk about it. I think it's great that like a lot of this is, as social media is developing, a lot of this is being recognized. There, you can get help, and etc. But I think it's also kind of relevant to say that when you say, it's hard to say, it's very hard to say that something is causing social media, causing mental illness when it didn't exist 50 years, 60 years ago, because even 50, 60 years ago, there weren't really that many like mental illness diagnoses, right? We can all probably imagine how mental illness was like socially treated, not medically, like 100 years ago. So I think it's hard to make a comparison, is what I'm saying, right? It's hard to say, oh, this is a new thing that didn't exist, or like maybe there are this like really bad other things that happened because there was no social media. So I think when you talk about mental illness, you have to realize that we basically have almost no data before like 50 years ago, and like for actual serious nuance before like 20 years ago. Completely realistic. So I think that's important to kind of keep in mind while discussing.
But I would like to point out here that I think there are some structural reasons why this might be more of a problem, even though we don't have the data to compare it right now versus the history, because I feel like there is this like inherent just accessibility to seeking confirmation on social media, right? Before social media, I don't think you would have access to that many people's opinions about you, and now you do, and you can strive to make those opinions good, right? And you do that because you tend to want to people to perceive you as a pretty person, a good person, whatever, right? So I feel like this is inherent, structurally inherent to that. Like before that, I mean, you could not go up to 100 people and just ask them whether they liked your shirt, and now you can. So now you worry about whether they will like your shirt.
Any more thoughts? Well, then a next question. So do you guys think that this situation of how social media works is going to change, or will this issue also consume the printed media entirely? So especially with generations becoming more and more of a cyber society. So everything we talked about, will it get better? Will it get worse?
As somebody who has to let's I don't want to use the word professional, but that has to deal with the integration of social media in more traditional forms of media. More specifically, not perhaps traditional forms of media per se, but very traditional media environments. I think that's bad. It is absolutely consuming the traditional media environments. I mean, if just look at this is shocking to me, and I'm not like super old, but to me this is shocking. Maybe I am. Maybe this means I am super old. But it's like all we get all of our like since a year ago, we suddenly get all of our political news from Twitter. All of it. It's like any political article is just like, oh, here is what this guy tweeted. Oh, like okay, I'm exaggerating, not everyone, but like, like and the amount that traditional journalists have to rely, have to. It's like if you don't, you're screwed. You don't have the news, you don't have the like input. That you have to rely on social media is staggering. I think that's very interesting. I don't think it's bad necessarily. But I think the problem is that we haven't adapted, and especially not traditional media hasn't adapted. And I think we'll have to wait for for the like the generations that are socialized with social media take over, like do the majority of traditional media and see what the effect of that is. Because there's a huge difference in the way that older journalists that are used to no social media thing deal with this thing.
Okay. Moving back to the movie, so to the social dilemma. What are your thoughts that it's actually people who used to work in social media companies and were very eager about their advancements and what their jobs actually were? What do you think that it was those guys who were coming back to warn us? And I think some of them even don't let their children use social media. So what are our thoughts on that? Benjamin, maybe you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they are faced with like the problems and the existence of the problems that like the ordinary population isn't faced with, right? And is not aware of. And that's why they are like more able to rationally decide what is a good amount of social media for their children, and obviously it's a minimal or even non-existent amount, right? And I think that the majority of people actually let their children and like young kids have these social media accounts and like unlimited YouTube access and so on, because they're not aware of the dangers themselves, right? If they were aware of them, they wouldn't let them, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think this is a tricky question, specifically what Benjamin was talking about children. Because on one hand, yes, obviously, right? It's probably not okay that a child, use the internet for hours unsupervised every day. But I think on the other hand, I don't think it's good that you're completely cut off from something that, let's face it, will be the reality when you don't become involved. I think that's also another issue. And I think it's a problem of just like, parents themselves perhaps not having the knowledge to be able to tackle this, right? And maybe in those cases, yes, it is perhaps better that we have. But I think schools could do more on this, right? The digital education level of that people get in our schools is horrible. And I think while that's easy to say, I think what the solution is, it's hard, right? Because these are not, a state level education system or even private sector. That doesn't really matter necessarily. These are slow systems to adapt, right? These are not systems that are made to react to, oh, now TikTok is the thing. Oh, sorry, like, I'm pretty sure like the school system would still be on MySpace, right? We would teach social media. And these are not easy things to answer. And it's hard. It's easy to blame somebody, but I think that we need to have way bigger structural like solutions than just saying, oh, teachers make stuff more interesting. But I think when it comes to the actual like employees, another thing that's kind of interesting to keep in mind, and I don't actually know how this relates in the sense that I'm not sure I know how it relates, I promise, but I'm not really sure how it whether it's a bad or a good thing. That's what I want to say. Is that social media companies have very specific workplace culture. I don't know if everyone's ever like been or talked to these people. It's like they have this like, and Google started all of this with the like happy, oh, everyone's so happy and nice, and our workplace is actually a big playground, and like it's a bit culty really. And I wonder if this also kind of, how this, I'm not sure, I'm not sure how it plays into like, previous employees of this company talking about it.
Okay, I think this would be it for questions. So,
So yes, maybe we should wrap it up. Maybe we should, this is the point where we thank the debaters for, I don't know, putting a lot on our tables. I guess, sorry. And call it a day. Because obviously you are in your own medium and you swim like fish in it, whereas the vast majority of students need to sleep on it, think about it a little bit, and we'll all have fruitful debates after debates, and we can report on them, let you know what the feelings were, what the new considerations that you've given rise to, what sort of considerations happened, what sort of changes of heart, if they happen. Let me tell you all also that Nusha kindly offered her services in the, she says that she's perfectly willing to come to class and be part of another Q&A session if we so choose. So that's lovely of you. Thank you very much, Nusha. It's late. I'm just very sorry for all the benefits that come with Zoom. What we cannot hear and what we cannot give to one another is personal contact and some cheering and a round of applause, and it's things like that that I really miss. And maybe you could use, or we can all use those symbols. Reactions. Go for reactions and give a big round of applause to our debaters. Yeah, thank you. Anyway, let us all sleep on it, go through our notes once again, especially my students. We meet early in the morning tomorrow morning, so you probably won't have a chance to go through the recording once before we meet, but it'll be there all right, as promised, within an hour, as promised. And now, unless anyone would badly like to add anything, I bid you all goodbye and good night, and thank you for being a very gracious, nice audience. See you soon. See you tomorrow. Debaters, don't disappear yet. We have our pint of beer now.